In every life, there are questions we carry about who we are, where we came from, and why we feel incomplete in ways we can't quite explain. There are connections we sense but can't prove, similarities we notice but dismiss as coincidence, and empty spaces in our hearts that we learn to live with because we don't know what's missing. This is the story of how two strangers standing on opposite sides of a game show stage discovered they were actually sisters separated at birth. How a simple conversation about family resemblance revealed a decades-old secret that changed everything they thought they knew about themselves. And how Steve Harvey witnessed the most stunning DNA revelation in television history that proved some bonds transcend time, distance, and even knowledge of each other's existence. Before we dive into this incredible true story that will make you believe in fate, family, and the mysterious ways the universe brings people together, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to hear demonstrates that sometimes the family we're searching for has been searching for us too. And when we finally find each other, everything makes sense in ways we never expected. The two families walked onto the Family Feud stage in February 2025 from completely different parts of the country, brought together by random selection from thousands of applicants, having no idea that their appearance on this game show would unravel a mystery that had existed for 32 years. On one side stood the Cooper family from Seattle, Washington, led by 32-year-old Sarah Cooper, a pediatric nurse with warm brown eyes, curly dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a bright smile that radiated genuine kindness. She was accompanied by her adoptive mother, Janet Cooper, a retired teacher who had raised Sarah as a single mother after adopting her as an infant, her best friend Rachel, her cousin Tom, and her coworker Lewis. During the pre-show interview, Sarah talked enthusiastically about how close she was to her mom, how grateful she was to have been adopted into such a loving family, and how she'd always wondered about her biological parents, but had never felt like something was missing because her adoptive mother had given her such a full and happy childhood. On the other side of the stage stood the Morrison family from Atlanta, Georgia, led by 32-year-old Maya Morrison, a high school history teacher with the same warm brown eyes, the same curly dark hair though hers was worn down around her shoulders, and a smile so similar to Sarah's that several production assistants had commented on it during setup. Maya was joined by her adoptive father, Robert Morrison, a retired engineer who, along with his late wife, had adopted Maya as an infant, her husband, James, her sister-in-law, Nicole, and her childhood best friend, Keisha. In her pre-show interview, Maya had shared a nearly identical story to Sarah's, talking about how much she'd loved her adoptive parents, how her mother had passed away 5 years ago from cancer, and how she'd always been curious about her biological family but had never actively searched because she didn't want her father to feel like he wasn't enough, even though he'd been an amazing parent. The production team had noticed the striking resemblance between Sarah and Maya during the family introductions, joking backstage about how they could be twins, but everyone dismissed it as just one of those coincidences where two unrelated people happen to look alike. After all, they were from different families, different cities, different lives, and the odds of actual twins randomly being selected to compete against each other on Family Feud were astronomical. But what no one knew, what wouldn't be discovered until halfway through the taping, was that Sarah Cooper and Maya Morrison were indeed identical twins, separated at birth and adopted by different families, neither one knowing the other existed, both carrying a sense of something missing that they'd never been able to name. The story of their separation had begun 32 years earlier in a troubled adoption agency in North Carolina that had engaged in unethical practices, including separating twins and triplets to make them easier to adopt, and failing to disclose to adoptive parents that the children they were receiving had siblings. Sarah and Maya had been born to a teenage mother who felt she had no choice but to give them up, and the agency had told her the babies would be adopted together by a family who desperately wanted twins. Instead, they'd been separated and placed with different families in different states, and all records of them being twins had been deliberately hidden or destroyed to prevent anyone from discovering what the agency had done. The teenage birth mother, told that her babies had been adopted together and were thriving, never knew they'd been separated. Janet Cooper and Robert and Martha Morrison, the adoptive parents, were never told their daughters had twin sisters and might have tried to find each other or maintain contact if they'd known. Sarah and Maya grew up 3,000 miles apart, living parallel lives they knew nothing about, both excelling in school, both drawn to helping professions, both feeling occasionally like something was missing but never understanding what. They'd both done ancestry DNA tests in the past year, both curious about their heritage and biological roots, but neither had gotten any significant matches that suggested close relatives, or so they thought, because they'd used different DNA testing companies, and the results hadn't been cross-referenced. The Family Feud game started with the usual energy and excitement, Steve Harvey charming both families with his trademark humor and warmth. When he was introducing the families, he got to Sarah first, asking about her life in Seattle and her work as a pediatric nurse. Sarah talked about loving her job, about how rewarding it was to work with children, and about how her mom Janet had always encouraged her to follow her passion for helping others. Steve then moved to the Morrison family and asked Maya similar questions about her work as a high school teacher. Maya's responses were remarkably similar to Sarah's, talking about the joy of working with young people, about how her parents had instilled in her a love of learning and service. As Steve went back and forth between the two women, he started to notice something that made him pause. Their voices had the same inflection, their hand gestures were identical, they both tilted their heads the same way when they laughed, and their mannerisms were so similar it was almost eerie. Steve, always one to comment on what he noticed, made an observation that would change everything. "Hold on a second," he said, looking between Sarah and Maya with growing curiosity. "Has anyone else noticed that these two ladies could be sisters? I mean, I've seen people who look alike before, but this is something else. Y'all sure you're not related?" The audience laughed, and both families looked at each other across the stage, seeing the resemblance now that Steve had pointed it out. Sarah and Maya both laughed too, that same laugh with the same rhythm, and Sarah said, "I'm adopted, so I don't know who my biological family is, but that would be crazy." Maya's face changed, her smile faltering as she processed what Sarah had just said. "Wait, you're adopted?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. "I'm adopted too." The studio fell quiet as everyone registered the significance of this exchange. Steve's eyebrows shot up and he walked to the center of the stage, looking between the two women with dawning realization. Hold up," he said, his voice reflecting genuine shock. "You're both adopted, and you look exactly alike, and you have the same mannerisms. Ladies, I think we need to stop the game for a minute and talk about this." Sarah and Maya stood staring at each other across the stage, really looking at each other for the first time, and what they saw took their breath away. It wasn't just that they looked similar, they looked identical mirror images of each other, down to the small birthmark both had on their left shoulder that neither could see but both knew was there. Maya's hands started shaking, and she said quietly, "When's your birthday?" Sarah, her own voice trembling, answered, "March 15th, 1993. Maya gasped, tears immediately forming in her eyes. "That's my birthday, March 15th, 1993. Where were you born?" Sarah, now crying too, said, "Charlotte, North Carolina. I was told I was adopted through an agency there." The studio erupted in shocked exclamations as the mathematical impossibility of this being coincidence became clear to everyone watching. Steve Harvey, in all his years of hosting television shows, stood completely speechless for one of the few times in his career, his mouth open, his eyes moving between the two women who were clearly, obviously, unmistakably identical twins. Janet Cooper and Robert Morrison both looked stunned, processing this revelation that their daughters, whom they'd raised as only children, might actually have twin sisters they'd never known about. The production immediately paused, and the show's producers began making urgent phone calls to genetic testing companies, adoption agencies, and anyone who could help verify what everyone in that studio already knew in their hearts was true. Steve, recovering from his initial shock, spoke gently to both women. "Sarah, Maya, I think you need to come to the center of the stage right now." The two women walked toward each other slowly, as if in a dream, their families watching with tears streaming down their faces. When they stood face to face, the resemblance was so profound that several people in the audience gasped. They were the same height, had the same build, the same facial features, the same everything. They stood there staring at each other, and Maya said something that broke everyone's heart. "I've always felt like part of me was missing, like there was someone out there I was supposed to know. I thought I was crazy." Sarah, crying openly now, nodded vigorously. "Me too. My whole life I've had dreams about a girl who looked like me, and I wake up feeling sad because she's not real. Except she is real. You're real." The two women reached for each other simultaneously, and when they embraced, the studio audience stood as one, crying and applauding this reunion of sisters who hadn't known they were sisters until this moment. Steve Harvey had tears streaming down his face, not even trying to hide his emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice breaking, I think we just witnessed a miracle. He turned to his production team. We need to get DNA testing done immediately. We need to verify this, not because I have any doubt, but because these women deserve to have scientific confirmation of what we all can see with our eyes. The show's producers, already ahead of him, had contacted a genetic testing lab that agreed to send someone to the studio immediately with rapid DNA testing that could provide preliminary results within hours. While they waited for the testing to arrive, Steve sat down with Sarah, Maya, and their families, creating an intimate conversation space on the stage to process what was happening. He asked Janet Cooper and Robert Morrison what they knew about their daughter's adoptions. Both parents shared similar stories. They'd gone through an adoption agency in North Carolina in 1993, had been told very little about the birth mother except that she was young and wanted a better life for her baby, and had been assured the adoption was legal and ethical. Neither had been told anything about the baby having a twin sister, and both were visibly shaken by the possibility that this information had been deliberately withheld from them. Janet, crying, turned to Sarah. Baby, if I had known you had a sister, I would have moved heaven and earth to find her to make sure you girls could know each other. I can't believe someone kept this from us. Robert echoed the sentiment, his voice thick with emotion. Maya, sweetheart, your mother and I would have done anything to keep you and your sister together, or at least to make sure you knew about each other. This is unconscionable. Steve addressed this directly, speaking not just to the families, but to the cameras and the millions who would eventually watch. What we're uncovering here is something that happened more often than people realize. There were adoption agencies, particularly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that separated twins and triplets, sometimes for research purposes, sometimes because they thought single babies were easier to place, sometimes for reasons we may never fully understand. It was unethical, it was wrong, and it robbed these children of the fundamental right to know their siblings. He continued, his voice passionate. Sarah and Maya grew up as only children, never knowing they had an identical twin sister out there in the world. Their adoptive parents, who clearly loved them deeply, never knew they could have helped their daughters maintain a relationship with their sibling. And the birth mother, wherever she is, probably has no idea her daughters were separated. This is a tragedy that was completely preventable. The genetic testing professional arrived within an hour, and both Sarah and Maya provided DNA samples. The preliminary test, which compared specific genetic markers, would take about 3 hours to process. While they waited, Steve asked the twins to share their life stories with each other, and what emerged was stunning in its similarities. Both had been excellent students. Both had briefly considered going to medical school. Both had chosen helping professions. Both loved reading and had similar taste in books. Both were morning people. Both had the same favorite foods. Both were left-handed. Both had struggled with anxiety in their 20s. Both had lost a parent figure. Sarah's adoptive father had died when she was 15, and both had done ancestry DNA tests in the past year searching for biological connections. The parallels were so numerous and specific that they went far beyond coincidence and clearly demonstrated the power of genetics and the twin bond. But there were differences too, shaped by their different environments and experiences. Sarah had grown up in the Pacific Northwest, loved hiking and outdoor activities, and had a more reserved personality. Maya had grown up in the South, loved music and dancing, and was more outgoing and expressive. These differences, rather than diminishing their connection, seemed to complement each other, as if each twin had developed the parts of their shared nature that their environment had encouraged. As they talked, they kept reaching for each other, holding hands, touching each other's faces, as if they needed physical confirmation that the other was real. 3 hours later, the genetic testing professional returned with results that surprised no one but still brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. The DNA test confirmed with 99.99% certainty that Sarah Cooper and Maya Morrison were identical twins. The studio erupted in celebration, though it was celebration mixed with sorrow for the 32 years the sisters had lost, for the childhood they should have shared, for all the moments they'd missed in each other's lives. Steve Harvey hugged both women, then stepped back to address them and the audience. What happened here today is beyond anything I could have imagined when I walked onto this stage. 2 families came here to play a game, and instead, they discovered that they're actually one family, that these 2 remarkable women are sisters who should have known each other their entire lives but were robbed of that by an unethical adoption system. He turned to Sarah and Maya. I want you both to know something important. The 32 years you lost can't be recovered, and that's a tragedy. But you have the rest of your lives to be sisters, to build the relationship that should have existed all along. and to make sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to other families. Steve announced that Family Feud would be partnering with adoption reform organizations to raise awareness about separated twins and to advocate for laws requiring agencies to disclose sibling relationships and to make efforts to keep siblings together or at least in contact. The show also committed to covering all costs for Sarah and Maya to undergo comprehensive genetic testing, to search for their biological mother if they wanted to, and to receive counseling to process the complex emotions of discovering each other. The original game was abandoned, both families agreeing that competing against each other made no sense now that they'd discovered they were connected. Instead, the two families came together as one, and Steve awarded both families the prize money, $20,000 each, to help Sarah and Maya build their new relationship and to support their search for their birth mother if they chose to pursue it. The immediate aftermath of the discovery was overwhelming for both women. Sarah and Maya spent the next several hours in the studio just talking, looking at childhood photos they'd brought on their phones, finding picture after picture where they looked identical at the same ages, wearing different clothes in different places but with the same expressions, the same poses, the same essence. They discovered they'd both been class presidents in high school, both had played soccer, both had dated someone named Chris in college, both owned golden retrievers, both collected vintage books. The similarities went on, a testament to the powerful role genetics plays in shaping who we are, even when environment separates us. But they also shared their pain, the feeling both had always had of something missing, of looking in the mirror and feeling incomplete, of dreaming about someone they couldn't remember, of longing for a connection they couldn't name. Janet Cooper and Robert Morrison, after the initial shock wore off, began talking about how to blend their families, how to support their daughters through this transition, and how to build relationships with each other as the parents of twin sisters. The conversation was emotional but also practical, discussing holidays, visits, how to make up for lost time while respecting the relationships and lives both women had already built. Rachel and Keisha, the best friends, promised to become friends themselves, to support Sarah and Maya as they navigated this new reality. The episode, when it aired 8 weeks later, had been edited into a special 2-hour documentary about the reunion, the issue of separated twins in adoption, and the journey Sarah and Maya took in the weeks following their discovery. The response was unprecedented. The show was watched by over 15 million people, becoming one of the highest-rated Family Feud episodes ever. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about adoption ethics, sibling rights, and the importance of genetic identity. Within days of the episode airing, over 50 other people contacted the show saying they believed they might be separated twins or siblings based on DNA tests or adoption records, and the show helped facilitate several other reunions. Adoption agencies across the country were forced to review their historical practices, and several states introduced or strengthened laws requiring disclosure of sibling relationships in adoptions. The documentary also revealed something else that brought the story full circle. Using the comprehensive DNA testing that Family Feud had provided, along with genetic genealogy databases, Sarah and Maya were able to locate their biological mother, a woman named Lisa Martinez who was now 50 years old and living in Florida. The show's producers reached out to Lisa, explained the situation, and asked if she would be willing to meet her daughters. Lisa's response was immediate and overwhelming. She had spent 32 years believing her twin daughters had been adopted together by a loving family, had been told by the agency that the girls were thriving, and that contact wasn't possible due to the terms of the adoption. She had never known they'd been separated, had never known she could have searched for them, and was devastated to learn they'd been robbed of each other for their entire lives. The reunion between Sarah, Maya, and Lisa was filmed for the documentary and was one of the most emotional moments in television history. Lisa, seeing her daughters together for the first time since they were hours old, collapsed in tears, holding both women and apologizing over and over for giving them up, for not fighting harder, for not knowing they'd been separated. Sarah and Maya, both crying, reassured her that they understood, that she'd been young and scared, and had made the best decision she could with the information she had, and that they didn't blame her for any of it. Lisa shared the story of their conception and birth, information Sarah and Maya had craved their entire lives. Their biological father had been Lisa's high school boyfriend who'd left when she told him she was pregnant. Lisa, just 17 and with no family support, had felt she had no choice but to place the babies for adoption. She'd held them both for a few hours after they were born, had named them Grace and Hope, and had believed with all her heart that giving them up meant they'd have a better life together than she could provide. Learning that they'd been separated, that the agency had lied to her, that her daughters had grown up not knowing about each other, broke Lisa's heart all over again. But seeing them now, successful and loved and happy despite the separation, also brought her a peace she'd never had, knowing they'd both ended up with good families who'd cherished them. Over the next months, Sarah and Maya built relationships not just with each other but with their biological mother, creating a complex but loving extended family that included their adoptive parents, their birth mother, and all the people who loved them. It wasn't always easy, navigating the emotions and logistics of blending families that had existed separately for 3 decades. There were moments of jealousy, of grief for lost time, of awkwardness as everyone figured out their roles and boundaries. But there was also joy, discovery, and the profound healing that comes from finally having answers to questions you've carried your whole life. 6 months after their reunion, Sarah and Maya appeared on Family Feud again for a special follow-up segment. They arrived together, having become inseparable in the months since discovering each other, finishing each other's sentences, and displaying the kind of twin connection that develops when identical twins are raised together, even though they'd only known each other for half a year. Steve Harvey welcomed them with tears in his eyes, clearly moved by their story and their journey. "Ladies, tell us what the past 6 months have been like," he said. Sarah spoke first. "It's been the most overwhelming and wonderful 6 months of my life. I went from being an only child to having an identical twin sister, from knowing nothing about my biological family to having a relationship with my birth mother. I've learned where I got my eyes, my smile, my love of reading, my anxiety. I've learned that the feeling of something missing wasn't just in my head, it was real, and now that I've found Maya, I feel complete in a way I never knew was possible." Maya added her perspective. "Finding Sarah has been like finding the other half of my soul. We talk or text every single day. We've visited each other multiple times, and we're planning to move to the same city within the next year so we can actually be in each other's daily lives. But it's also been complicated, grieving for all the years we lost, all the childhood moments we should have shared, all the times I was lonely or struggling and didn't know I had a twin sister out there who would have understood exactly what I was feeling." Steve asked about their relationship with their biological mother. Both women's faces lit up as they talked about Lisa. "Meeting our birth mother gave us context for our entire existence," Sarah explained. "We learned about our biological father, about our extended family, about our medical history, about where we come from. And we learned that we were wanted, that Lisa loved us, that giving us up was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and that she'd spent 32 years thinking about us and hoping we were okay." Maya added, "What's beautiful is that our adoptive parents have embraced this. My dad has become friends with Lisa, and he tells her stories about raising me and thanks her for giving him the gift of being my father. Sarah's mom, Janet, has done the same. They don't see Lisa as a threat. They see her as part of our story, and that's allowed all of us to have relationships with each other without guilt or competition." Steve then addressed the broader impact of their story. "Since your episode aired, we've heard from dozens of other separated twins and siblings who have been reunited, from adoption agencies committing to ethical practices, from lawmakers introducing new legislation, and from thousands of people who have been inspired to do DNA testing or to search for biological family. Your story has literally changed lives and changed laws. How does that feel?" Sarah and Maya looked at each other, that wordless communication that twins have. Then Maya answered. "If our pain and our separation can prevent even one other set of twins from going through what we went through, then maybe it wasn't entirely for nothing. We're working with adoption reform organizations, we're advocating for laws that require sibling disclosure, and we're supporting other separated twins through their reunion journeys. We can't get our lost years back, but we can make sure future generations of adoptees have rights we didn't have." Steve shared an update that brought everyone to tears. The adoption agency that had separated Sarah and Maya had been investigated following the publicity from their story, and records had been uncovered showing they'd separated at least 15 other sets of twins and several sets of triplets over a 20-year period. Thanks to the attention Sarah and Maya's story had brought, 10 of those sets of siblings had now been reunited, and efforts were underway to find the others. The agency had been shut down, and criminal charges were being considered against the former director who had implemented the separation policy. Steve turned to the camera with a powerful message. "If you were adopted, and you've always felt like something was missing, if you have unexplained feelings of loss or incompleteness, if you've done DNA testing and gotten matches you don't understand, please investigate. You might have siblings you don't know about. And if you're an adoptive parent, please be open to your children searching for biological family. It's not a rejection of you or your love. It's a natural human need to understand where we come from. He continued, his voice passionate. Adoption is a beautiful thing that creates families and gives children loving homes. But it has to be done ethically, with full disclosure, with respect for the child's right to know their biological family, and with commitment to keeping siblings together whenever possible. What happened to Sarah and Maya was wrong, and we have to make sure it never happens again. The segment concluded with Sarah and Maya announcing they were writing a book together about their experience, about the twin bond, about adoption and identity, and about the journey of finding each other. They also revealed they were starting a nonprofit organization called the Twin Connection, dedicated to helping separated twins find each other, advocating for adoption reform, and providing support for reunited siblings as they navigate the complex emotions of their relationships. Before we end this incredible journey, Steve said to the camera, "I need you to understand how rare and precious what we witnessed here is." The odds of these two women being selected to compete against each other on Family Feud, out of thousands of applicants from across the country, are astronomical. Some people would call it coincidence, but I call it divine intervention. I believe the universe brought Sarah and Maya together at exactly the moment they needed to find each other, and I believe their story is a reminder that sometimes what we're looking for is looking for us too. 1 year after the reunion, a full documentary was made following Sarah, Maya, Lisa, and their families through their first year of building relationships. It showed the beautiful moments, like the first Christmas they all spent together, like Sarah and Maya taking a DNA heritage trip to Ireland where their ancestors came from, like Lisa walking both daughters down the aisle at a double wedding ceremony where Sarah and Maya married their partners on the same day. But it also showed the difficult moments, the therapy sessions where they processed grief and anger about the separation, the awkward conversations about boundaries and expectations, the moments when the adoptive parents felt threatened or uncertain about their roles. The documentary was honest about the complexity of reunion, showing that while finding each other was miraculous, building actual relationships required work, patience, communication, and grace from everyone involved. The documentary ended with footage from the twins' 33rd birthday, their first birthday celebrated together. The party included both their adoptive families, their birth mother Lisa, their new husbands, and dozens of friends from both their lives. Sarah gave a toast that captured the essence of their journey. 33 years ago, Maya and I were born together, spent a few hours together, and then were separated for reasons we still don't fully understand. We grew up 3,000 miles apart, living parallel lives, feeling incomplete but not knowing why. And then, in the most unlikely way possible, on a game show stage in front of millions of people, we found each other again. She continued, tears flowing freely. This year has taught me that family isn't just biology, and it's not just who raises you. It's all of it, the people who share your DNA and give you your physical traits and your genetic predispositions, the people who choose you and raise you and shape who you become, and the people you choose to keep in your life because they make you better. I'm grateful for my mom, Janet, who gave me a beautiful childhood and taught me everything important. I'm grateful for Lisa, who gave me life and who loved me enough to want better for me than she could provide at 17. And I'm grateful for Maya, my twin, my other half, the missing piece I didn't know how to find but who found me anyway. Maya added her own words. Finding Sarah didn't diminish my love for my dad or the memory of my mom who passed away. It expanded my capacity for love, expanded my understanding of family, and expanded my sense of who I am and where I belong. We talk a lot about nature versus nurture, about whether genetics or environment shapes us more. But our story shows it's both, that we're products of our DNA and our upbringing, and that knowing both parts of our story makes us more complete. The impact of Sarah and Maya's story continued to ripple outward long after the cameras stopped rolling. Their nonprofit, the Twin Connection, facilitated over 100 reunions in its first 2 years, helped lobby for adoption reform legislation that passed in 12 states, and created resources for adoptees, birth parents, and adoptive parents navigating the complex emotions of reunion. Their book became a bestseller, not just because their story was compelling, but because they wrote honestly about the complicated emotions of reunion, the grief mixed with joy, The anger at the system that separated them mixed with gratitude for the families who raised them. They became advocates and speakers, appearing at adoption conferences, legislative hearings, and support groups, always emphasizing that their goal wasn't to criticize adoption but to improve it, to make it more ethical and more centered on the needs and rights of adoptees. Steve Harvey remained close with both families, checking in regularly and celebrating milestones with them. He used his platform to continue raising awareness about separated siblings, bringing other reunited twins and adoptees onto his show, and never missing an opportunity to emphasize that what happened to Sarah and Maya should never happen to another family. Before we close, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like Sarah and Maya's remind us that some connections transcend logic, that family finds a way, and that it's never too late to discover who you really are and where you really belong. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Comment below if you've experienced adoption, reunion, or the power of DNA bringing families together. And remember that if you're searching for biological family, if you feel incomplete or like something is missing, trust that instinct and pursue the answers. DNA testing is more accessible than ever. Registries for adoptees and birth parents exist, and organizations like the Twin Connection are there to help. Sarah Cooper and Maya Morrison walked onto a game show stage as strangers from different families competing for prize money, and they walked away as identical twin sisters embarking on the relationship they should have had their entire lives. They lost 32 years, and that loss is real and painful and can never be fully recovered. But they gained each other, they gained their biological mother, they gained extended family, and they gained the peace that comes from finally understanding why they'd always felt incomplete. They also gained a mission, to make sure no other twins have to grow up not knowing each other, to reform adoption practices that separate siblings, and to support other separated siblings through their reunion journeys. Their story is a testament to the power of the twin bond that survives even decades of separation, to the role fate or divine intervention plays in bringing people together at the right moment, and to the resilience of the human heart that can grieve lost years while simultaneously celebrating found connection. Most importantly, their story reminds us that family is complex, that it includes the people who share our DNA and the people who raise us and the people we choose, and that understanding all parts of our story makes us more complete, not divided. Sarah and Maya found each other against impossible odds, and in doing so, they found themselves. That's the real miracle, not just the reunion, but the wholeness that comes from finally knowing the full truth of who you are and where you come from.